Well, hi everybody. Welcome to the press conference online from California Humanities War Comes Home Initiative. I'm really pleased you could join us. My name is Rachel Ann Goodman. I'm Communications Coordinator for Cal Humanities, and we'd like to just welcome you to this short presentation. I'm very excited that we get to share the scope and breadth of this statewide initiative with you. The format of today's call is that we'll spend about 10 minutes doing a PowerPoint going over the various components of War Comes Home. And then we'll hear from Karl Marlantes. He's the author of bestsellers Matterhorn and What It Is Like to Go to War. And then we'll open it up to questions. You can, at any point, ask a question in your chat window of your control panel there. We will be recording this and then uploading it to our website at calhum.org. So if you know anyone who missed it, you can pass that along. And I would like to also introduce who's on the line with me, Vanessa Wong. She is Cal Humanities Director of Programs, and she's going to start us off by explaining a little bit about who Cal Humanities is.
So, welcome everyone. I'm Vanessa, and I thought I would just introduce our organization to you briefly first because we're a kind of well-kept secret. We're actually a state partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities, and we have been since 1975. And we're dedicated to cultivating a state of open mind in the people of California. So how do we do that? We're actually a grant maker, and we also create programs that uncover stories and the histories of the diverse people of California. And we do that through a number of ways. We give grants for broadcast quality documentary, film, radio, and also new media. We fund local communities to tell their own stories through collecting oral histories or creating exhibits or murals. We train librarians to facilitate civic dialogues in their community. We create statewide themed initiatives. And our first one was Searching for Democracy that was leading up to the 2012 elections, and that one engaged over 400,000 people in person and over 2.5 million people virtually. So we have found statewide initiatives to be a really great way of raising issues and consciousness over California. So go on to what War Comes Home is.
So War Comes Home is the second of these initiatives. That's a statewide multi-year initiative fostering a statewide conversation about how we welcome veterans home. Cal Humanities is supporting hundreds of events across California to create this conversation, really holding open the space for dialogue, which we feel isn't happening on a very big scale at this point. And we believe that by understanding veterans better, we can respond more wisely to returning troops and begin to reweave the fabric of our communities. And next, so why should we do this? Why launch War Comes Home? Really, again, holding open the space for a public conversation. We feel that, and it's not just our feeling, it's many people's feeling, that a lot of veterans have come home from these longest wars and have felt like the public just didn't really care, didn't want to know that we had been at war. It was a very sanitized war in many ways. National Endowment for the Humanities is working on a major initiative like this about returning veterans, and next week PBS will air a 3-part series on returning veterans. So really it's just time to break the silence around it because there's a lot to be said about how we send people to war and how we welcome them home.
So not only are these often difficult subjects to talk about, but the fact is we have a shrinking population of people who have actually experienced active military service. So now that we have an all-volunteer military, we only have about 1.4 million people who are now in it, as compared to, say, the 9 million who were in the service during the Vietnam War or the 16 million who were during World War II. So what we have is a widening gap of people who have had military experience and then an even smaller number of those who have actually experienced combat and those who haven't. which is why we have a goal with this statewide initiative of really trying to raise awareness and increase understanding about the issues of veterans returning home, because we believe it's all of our responsibilities as a nation when we engage in conflict and how we think about and treat people who we send in harm's way and how they come back to us and our communities. So with War Comes Home, with this initiative, we will have a suite of programs. They are giving points of entry in lots of different ways to different communities for people to engage in this conversation. So we'll have forums that take place over the summer. We're doing a statewide read, which you'll be hearing a lot more about. We'll be working in schools, particularly with 11th and 12th grade teachers of history and government. We'll have local stories about people's own ways of how they work with veterans in their communities. We have a program in VA hospitals, and we will have a touring exhibit called War Comes Home, The Legacy. So, and here's some more information about that.
And let me just remind folks that we will be sending out to you a list of all of the events that we have nailed down around the state, so you can look at what's near you. And there's a lot of interview opportunities with many of these programs to talk to veterans. So we'll be sending you program descriptions and locations and emails for the contacts for these various events, many of which are happening all over the state as far as Shasta County and Mendocino County and the Moreno Valley. So it's really broad. Great. So the first one is public conversations, and there's going to be 5 of them in these cities. And we're going to tell you a little bit about what they're about, each one, because they're coming up. The first ones are in June. So the first one is in San Francisco with retired Commander Zoe Dunning. She was a successful challenger of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It's moderated by Dr. Elizabeth Hillman, who's a law professor and dean of Hastings Law School. So a lot of that conversation will be about how the people who came home after Don't Ask, Don't Tell may have been dealt a different hand than the ones after it had been eliminated, might be dealing with their benefits. And that'll be happening June 5th at the San Francisco Public Library. And the next one is Changing Faces, Diversity and the Veterans Experience, and that's June 11th in San Diego at the Public Library. And that one is a conversation about the changing face of the military. It'll be hosted and facilitated by Jorge Mariscal, who's a professor of Spanish and Chicano literature at UC San Diego, and we'll have 3 veterans on the panel. The next one's going to be in Los Angeles, and it's going to be about Hollywood, and it's called Celluloid Soldiers, Veterans Through Hollywood's Lens. It's August 10th, and you may have heard about the film that's been touring a lot called The Invisible War. We have the filmmaker, Kirby Dick, on our panel, and he's going to be talking about sexual assault in the military. He interviewed lots and lots of veterans about what their experiences were like. And April Fitzsimmons, who's also a screenwriter but also a veteran, will be there on the panel. Okay, next one is about trauma, understanding PTSD and its aftermath. It's happening Sunday, August 17th at Sacramento Public Library. And the moderator of that one will be a professor emeritus of American Studies at UC Davis, Jay Mecklin. And we have an author and Marine officer, David Morris. You might have heard the books, The Evil Hours, about recent wars, Storm on the Horizon. Really great panel of experts. The Vietnam vet Bob Tribe will be there. He served 1966 to 69. And again, all these people we can put you in touch with for interviews. We're happy to connect you if it's in your community or even if it's not, because I think they can be talking about these issues very adroitly. And finally, this is still firming up, but it's going to be in late August. This is about really the overall theme of War Comes Home is the experience of veterans returning. And that's going to be at the Riverside Library. And it's going to be moderated by David Glidden, the Professor Emeritus of Philosophy. So that's going to be a really interesting one. And that's our 5 conversations coming up.
The centerpiece really of the initiative is our California Reads program. And this is a program that is a statewide read of a single book. And we are so happy through many recommendations and a selection process that involved all kinds of community people and veterans and librarians and scholars. We all landed on this really great book, What It Is Like to Go to War, and we are really happy and lucky to have Karl Marlantes this morning on the line, and you'll be hearing from him a little later on. So this project, as I said, will be taking place through California's public libraries from September through November. Karl will actually be in the state on tour in October and November. And California Reads is a program where we made 43 grants to library systems throughout the state, and you can see where the dots are. But those dots actually don't represent the full breadth of the program, because these are just where the grants were made, but each of these systems have multiple branches, and we have over 340 branch libraries that are participating in this statewide read. And not only that, there will be over 800 planned programs at these libraries and with their community partners. So there'll be reading and discussion programs. There will be oral history collections. Some are doing writing workshops with veterans. They'll be showing films. There'll be performances. There'll be intergenerational dialogues. And there are also hundreds of community partners involved with this, from veteran serving organizations to high schools, community colleges, museums. And we can connect you with any of the participating libraries so you can get more information in any part of the state that you're particularly interested in, to get more detailed information about the programming that will be coming up this fall. Another program that we have, War Comes Home in Schools, is a teacher professional development program that will be working with teachers over the school year, particularly 11th and 12th grade teachers who are dealing with U.S. history and government standards, and this will all be state standard and Common Core aligned for those of you who know about the education field. These will involve scholar presentations and also oral history training. We're hoping to have the teachers engage their students in project-based learning with community organizations, particularly veteran serving organizations, and to be able to learn about U.S. history through the eyes of the shall we say, foot soldiers instead of the presidents and the generals who are often making these decisions. This is a way to get at the history through the people who enact the history on the ground.
Okay, moving right along, Community Stories is a program of Cal Humanities where they fund various community stories projects where a community does its own oral histories or history of its own peoples and presents it in some public way. And some of the ones are funded, are about veterans or connected to War Comes Home. One of the exciting ones that's coming up shortly is a play that was based on the War Letters project of Andrew Carroll. The play is called If All the Sky Were Paper, and they're going to be performing the play based on these war letters that were from the front back to home. That's going to be happening at the Kirk Douglas Theater June 9th in LA, and Berkeley Repertory Theater September. We'll get you the actual date of that. But there are community stories events in Contra Costa, Fresno, Monterey, Orange, Riverside, San Diego, and Sonoma. Another project is called War Inc., which is an exhibition of memorial tattoos that soldiers get when they're in the field that memorialize their experience of war. And that's going to be a visually rich website exhibition we'll be able to share with you as well.
We also have a program called Literature and Medicine in 3 of the major VA medical centers in California, in Sacramento, Palo Alto, and San Francisco. And this engages healthcare workers, actually, to read literature and watch films and read poetry, really to help deepen their understanding and empathy for the patients that they have, so they aren't just dealing with walking pathologies, but really are dealing with people and their complex experiences. And then the last piece is our Easy to Tour banner exhibit. It will be based on writings by veterans and their families, called War Comes Home, The Legacy. And this is something that we use to reach more far-flung parts of the state that might not be in range of museums or some of these other resources. So it can tour to community colleges and to cultural centers across the state, and this will be launching on Veterans Day.
And the timeline of these various pieces, I know there's a lot to digest, but the conversations are June and August. Then September and November we'll be doing the California Reads program and the Marlantes tour. And we have these ongoing projects with community stories. Really depends on when they launch, when the local community decides it's ready. It's all throughout this year. And then on Veterans Day, the exhibit begins touring. And then finally, I just wanted to leave us with this last idea before we go to Karl Marlantes' Q&A section, which is that really veterans are everybody's business. Their problems are our problems, and their strengths are our strengths. And they're coming back not only with challenges, but lots of gifts that it would behoove us to understand. And as a former journalist, I want to answer the question I've gotten a couple of times, which is, you know, why cover this and what's new about this story? I think you can't really cover this enough. I don't think it's being talked about to the degree people think it is. It's just not that high on the radar. We hear stories about, you know, the VA scandals, but we don't really hear personal experiences of veterans, and that's what we're trying to accomplish, is the personal stories of what it's really like. Which is a good segue to introduce our guest, who's patiently waiting on the line. And we're going to ask him a few questions and open it up to questions from you at this point. But first, let me introduce Karl Marlantes, who grew up in a small logging town on the Oregon coast and attended Yale on a National Merit Scholarship. He went on to study at Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar. He served as a Marine in Vietnam, where he was awarded the Navy Cross, the Bronze Star, 2 Navy Commendation Medals for Valor, 2 Purple Hearts, and 10 Air Medals. He is the author of 2 New York Times bestsellers, Matterhorn and What It Is Like to Go to War, the latter of which will be read by all Californians this fall. So thank you, Karl, for being with us. And I'm going to just ask you an opening question and then open it up to our panel of people who have joined us on this call. Maybe we'll just start out by asking you, how does this statewide reading of your book move us ahead in understanding the reality of veterans returning home?
Well, first, thank you very much for having me on this show and for choosing the book. It's quite an honor. You know, everybody sort of knows the old, you know, war is hell thing. I mean, like, okay, that's old news, but very little else is talked about, or even in the movies or other media, the rest of it, which is the you know, the comradeship, the spiritual aspects. I mean, you're asking young people to take human lives, and that really is something that you should just leave up to the gods. And yet we ask 19-year-olds to do that. What's the effect on that person's psyche, on their soul? Let's just get straight. I mean, there's a lot about war that is really thrilling. I mean, why do 19-year-olds join the Marines? I mean, you know, because it's kind of enticing, and somehow we want to sort of think of it as this sort of, it's either this or that. It's all of the above, and to get some understanding of it, you know, I think is a big help. And this I don't know what you call it, dialogue, I guess, that's going to be engendered by the Cal Humanities program is really important. And I was thinking about that, and you know, when we were more, quote, primitive peoples, warriors would come back, and there was a place where they talked about it. I mean, the whole community would sit around the campfires with them, and people would talk. I mean, sometimes they would brag, probably. Sometimes they would tell very sad stories. But there was a forum that was a natural sort of way for a veteran to sort of come home. And the other thing that has changed is that, you know, I mean, if the warriors went off to fight, the hunters went off to fight, and the whole community was involved in the war. They weren't eating any meat. And that has changed enormously. I mean, we have been fighting a war for 13 years, and I don't think that it impinges on any except a tiny percentage of the population. And so we now have to sort of have artificial ways of doing the things that are required to help veterans reintegrate into their communities that were just natural, because when we were running around in moccasins, it was just the way it was. But we're a highly industrialized society now, and yet the veterans still need a place to talk. They need a place to be understood. They need to be welcomed back. And one of my major issues is the community needs to understand that, I mean, how do I put it? There's this big rifle, and that rifle is paid for by everybody's taxes. And that rifle is built by, engineers who are taught by second-grade school teachers, and people drive their cars that, they pay the price of gas that's based on foreign policy by people that they've elected. At the end of this huge, long chain, some 19-year-old pulls the trigger. But the community somehow wants to say, well, he did the killing. Yes, he pulled the trigger, but that rifle was built by everybody. And we need to understand that. I mean, we need to sort of, one of the alienation issues is not just that veterans are afraid to talk because they'll be judged, or they've had terrible experiences or unshareable experiences, but there's another side of it. The community needs to start to understand that we've been at war. And if, we talk about the alienation of the veteran, he has half of the problem, and we have half of the problem. If we just don't believe we've been at war, what's he going to feel like? Well, he's not part of the group. And I think that is an enormous service that some organization like Cal Humanities can do, providing places where that dialogue, that understanding can be facilitated.
Well, you kind of got to my second question, which is how does this kind of conversation move us forward in what you just talked about? How does sitting down and opening up a space for people to ask questions of veterans and vice versa get us further down the road toward a more integrated society with the veterans returning?
Yeah, I did kind of touch on it. I mean, I just have to reiterate. It's, if veterans go to the VA and they go to veterans groups and they see therapists, I mean, all the things that people can do through organizations that now exist, they still are not part of the community. They are in a veterans group. And the community at large, quite frankly, doesn't know what they're doing or even is aware of it or basically cares. What something like your program can do is actually organize a space where community comes together. In other words, I sort of see it as the equivalent of the campfire. It's the modern version. And if we don't do this consciously, it will not get done. And that kind of dialogue where a veteran can start to feel like, hey, people have come here to talk and to listen. Gosh, that means they're interested. That's a huge step forward just in itself. And then if the atmosphere is such that, we're all here trying to understand, and believe me, we are part of this. You weren't the only one that did the job over there. All of that killing that happened, and believe me, killing happens. People don't like to think about it. We've been part of it, whether we like the war or dislike the war. There's no clean hands here. And providing a space, like I said, this sort of artificial campfire where everybody comes back together, that's what's going to help veterans come back into their communities. That's what they want. They want to be part of the community. And community is a huge part of healing these psychic and soul wounds. And it's very, very hard. I mean, modern society, isolated neighborhoods, I mean, we know all the problems.
Yeah. Well, at this point, I'd like to open it up to questions from our visitors who have signed on. I want to invite anybody who has questions to ask the questions that they might have of our panelists. Anybody who's talked, you could direct it at any one of us. So please go ahead and ask away. And if you don't have any, I'll ask another one, but I think that people might. So I'll leave room for folks. Here's some audio, but I'm not sure. Is this Elena Schulman?
Yeah, hi, sorry. I'm just trying to find my window. I didn't mean to unmute myself yet.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. You can join us in just a moment. I will ask a question while Carl's talking. Any of you can queue up and ask your next question. I just was curious because I've been asked this also, and as a former journalist, I think I know the answer, but I don't know exactly what you think the media could do to help improve understanding on this issue. What is their role in all of this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think media has a problem, which it always does, because news is usually something terrible. It's something that is, gets people's attention. And a veterans issue is an ongoing. There's not much exciting. The only exciting things that happen that you can report on are something like crazy veteran, kills family, those sorts of things, which is just the nature of news. But what I think, first of all, what can happen is that I've noticed in stories, news stories, that quite often there's no context. And I suspect that a lot of that reason there's no context is because I bet you that most reporters actually know very little about war or about the military because they're from the same population as the rest of the country. And like one of the examples, 4 Marines peed on some dead Afghanistan bodies about, I think it was a year ago. And it was like, major news story. Well, they're 19. Okay, that wasn't reported on in general. Their friend had just been killed. That wasn't reported on in general. They did something wrong. They did something bad. But there's no context that you can say, 4 drunken fraternity boys do sort of the same thing. And then there's the context of compare that act to the fact that we've been killing people. Let's just put it in context. And I think that if context were thought about, and it would sort of that would go a long way toward helping. Like I said, you don't excuse the behavior, but you put it in some kind of a context where you can say, okay, this is not a hanging offense. Maybe they should be broken in rank instead of court-martialed and drummed out of the Marine Corps, what is basically, I think, was probably going to happen to them. So I'm just saying, understanding that they're young and they're in a very difficult place, and they do dumb things. Who of us didn't do dumb things when we were 18?
I know we're about to run out of time here, so I wanted to leave it open, and if anybody has a question, please do join us at this moment. We're about to wrap, but we'd like to include anyone who would like questions. If you don't have any, we'd be happy to follow up and get you information through email as well. Not sure if we're struggling with the technology or waiting.
Yeah. Another thought I just had while we're sort of just in between here is that there's a lot of books that are written by veterans, about veterans, and reviews are really hard to get. I mean, as a writer, I know how hard it is to get a book reviewed. I mean, I think if reporters just would read a book and write a review, that would really be something that would help. It's actually something that you can report on.
Yes. And one more plug for all the story opportunities in War Comes Home. There are so many panelists who have personal experience being at war and coming home. We would be happy to put you in touch with any of them, including Karl when he goes on his tour. We can set up some interviews as he goes around the state. So keep that in mind. And I would like to thank all of you for joining us. Did anyone not get to ask a question that wanted to? I'll just leave another moment before we close. Okay. Want to be available to you. I would like to thank Karl Marlantes for being available from Connecticut today. I think that's where he is.
Rhode Island.
Oh, Rhode Island, okay.
Newport, Rhode Island, yeah.
Great, and I would like to thank all of you for joining us this morning for this War Comes Home press conference. As I mentioned earlier, it will be archived on our website, So if you have colleagues that may have missed this, it will be up and recorded for posterity on the Cal Humanities website. I'd like to also thank Vanessa Wong for being part of this as well today. I'm Rachel Ann Goodman. Thank you for joining us.